While documenting a nature reserve, this amateur videographer stumbled upon a mysterious nest. Intrigued, he set up a camera to capture the unfolding events. Upon his return, he discovered something truly extraordinary. Something so unbelievable that it had to be caught on film to be believed. To develop his video skills, amateur videographer Dan decided to try making a documentary. To make the most of it, he combined it with his vacation to Africa. There, he would be able to visit a nature reserve, which would be the perfect place for him to make his documentary. Dan wasn't alone on this journey. Due to his inexperience and the multiple days of traveling through the reserve, he hired a guide to help him. Kalu, as he was called, could tell him all about the nature and animals in the reserve, but both were unaware of the adventure that would unfold. After spending several days gathering footage, Dan and Kalu ventured into the tall grass in search of their next documentary subject. While Dan was focused on filming, Kalu suddenly shouted, "Dan, stop, watch out." Startled, Dan looked up, asking, "What?" Kalu warned him, "Watch out where you walk. You almost stepped on that nest." Pointing to the ground, Kalu explained that it was a snake's nest, specifically a mamba nest. Despite the danger, Dan, intrigued, decided to take a closer look, wondering aloud about the potential danger. Kalu confirmed that mambas were indeed very dangerous. Undeterred, Dan saw this as an opportunity for his documentary and asked if the eggs were close to hatching. Kalu inspected them and confirmed they were. Not wanting to miss any action, Dan set up a camera on a stand, hid it in the vegetation, and started recording, eager to capture whatever would happen next. Excited about his ingenious solution and hopeful for great footage for his documentary, Dan continued through the nature reserve with Kalu, leaving marks for navigation. While following Kalu, Dan heard some sounds behind them but dismissed them as the wind, unaware of the dark figure watching from the tall grass. After a full day of walking and filming, Dan and Kalu decided to check the nest they had discovered earlier. To their shock, they found the nest filled with eggshells but no snakes. Spotting the mother mamba, they noticed feathers in the grass around the nest, raising their concern. Dan cautiously retrieved his camera from the nest area, keeping an eye on the protective mamba. Back at camp, they reviewed the footage, expecting to see snake eggs hatching. However, they were surprised to witness bird-like animals emerging instead of snakes. Perplexed, Dan and Kalu questioned the authenticity of the situation. They pondered whether the snake had built a nest around another animal's eggs. Searching for answers, they hoped the footage would shed light on the unusual occurrence. Playing the video at high speed revealed minimal activity, with the eggs remaining still and the snake coming and going. The mystery persisted, leaving Dan contemplating the implications for his documentary. Seeing a sudden blur in the footage, Dan and Kalu were puzzled. Rewinding and playing at normal speed, they were shocked to discover a dark figure near the nest in the dark recording. They observed the figure swapping eggs, replacing mamba eggs with bird eggs. Both men were baffled and outraged. Kalu, realizing the severity of the situation, suggested taking the evidence to the nearby ranger post. Dan agreed, envisioning the potential impact on his documentary. Setting out for the ranger post in the morning, they arrived after 2 hours. They shared their discovery with the ranger, showing him the footage. The ranger, shocked by the revelation, expressed his disbelief and anger. Dan explained the motive behind their visit, hoping the footage would assist the ranger in identifying the culprit. The ranger, fueled by the evidence, acknowledged the need to intervene and prevent further harm to animals. Dan handed his camera to the ranger, urging him to keep it safe for the capture of the villain. The ranger, grateful, explained that his colleague would return the next day, limiting their current options. Without hesitation, Dan volunteered to assist, unaware of his pivotal role. They discussed strategies and crafted a plan, recognizing a potential trap site between the nest in the video and the ranger post. They decided to set up surveillance at another nest in the area, rushing against the approaching dusk. They quickly reached the location and verified that the eggs were intact. Relieved, they prepared for the operation. Dan carefully set up a hidden camera, while Kalu and the ranger established a discreet camp nearby. With everything in place, they anxiously monitored the live feed, hoping to catch the suspect in the act. Unexpectedly, a figure approached through the tall grass, and they readied themselves for action. As they moved closer, the ranger, Kalu, and Dan discovered that the intruder was none other than the ranger's colleague, arriving a day early to surprise him. Surprised by the unexpected turn of events, the ranger apologized for the misunderstanding, revealing that the person was not the suspect they were anticipating. "What is going on?" Dan asked, confused. "This is my colleague," the ranger said. "Why did you attack me, and who are these guys?" The colleague asked. The ranger explained the situation and what they were doing. The colleague was hesitant about the story and their plan, but after Dan showed him the video, he was furious. But before he could say something, they heard something. "Shush," the colleague said, while gesturing to stay quiet. In the distance, they heard tall grass rustling and footsteps. The group panicked. What could they do? They didn't have time to return to their camp. The sounds were too close. "Hide," the ranger whispered. They looked around and hid as best as possible. Dan sat right next to his camera, with leaves in his face and twigs poking into his body, and had a good view of the nest. He saw the other person steadily walking towards him, looking to the ground as if he were looking for something. Then, the person suddenly stopped. He saw the nest. The person stopped next to the nest and looked around. When satisfied, he took his bag and put it next to him. This has to be the right guy, Dan thought. He looked at his camera. It was still recording. Now we have him red-handed. Hopefully, the other guys won't jump in too quickly. After the person made the switch, the four of them came out of hiding simultaneously. Like they had some psychic connection. The person was scared beyond comprehension and was quickly taken by the two rangers, who seemed to recognize that the person wasn't who they thought he was. "Isn't this?" the ranger said. "Yes, he is," his colleague answered. Dan and Kalu made their way to the camp to inspect the footage and came back smiling. "It's all on there," Dan said while handing it to the ranger. "We've got him. This documentary is going to be awesome." Together, they headed down to the ranger post, unaware of what they would find out. Because it was night, they had to hold the person there for the night until they could transfer him to the police. Kalu and Dan also spent the night at the post. The next day, they watched as the police arrested the person responsible. "Did you find out why he did it?" Dan asked. "Yes, we did," the ranger replied. Dan and Kalu were curious. "So why did he do it?" Dan asked. "Well, I thought I recognized him, and my colleague confirmed it," the ranger explained. "We interviewed him for a job not long ago," he continued. The ranger then explained that their organization had to cancel a job offer due to budget constraints. The man took this personally and tried to make it seem like the rangers were doing a bad job so he could take one of their jobs. Dan and Kalu were shocked by the story. "It's unbelievable," Dan said. The ranger agreed, thanking them for their help. He explained that without them, the man might still be causing trouble. "We're happy we could assist," Dan said. In the end, Dan used his footage to create a documentary that exposed the darker side of nature reserves. The money raised from the documentary went to his foundation, which supported those in need and funded other documentaries that aimed to improve the world.